Hi, I'm Parni Jaggi, and we are going to continue with the synopsis of the novel Oliver Twist by Charles Dickens. In the previous video, we noticed how Oliver's life goes zigzag through a lot of struggles after he is born and his mother dies soon after his birth. He has to work at various places, but all the workplaces including where he is brought up as a child, Mrs. Mann's establishment, he is ill treated. He is kept hungry. He is always overworked. He's pale. He's fragile. He's unhealthy. And he has to go through lots of struggles, lots of tribulations, and lots of torture, mental torture, but still he emerges as a courageous boy. So, when in the last video we finished where he has escaped from the workplace and where he is an apprentice to Sowerbury. Now, when he escapes from that place towards the town, he has to walk to London. And nobody knows that he has gone and where he is going. He is alone, all by himself. So, in chapter 8, we see that Oliver, when he leaves that place, the horrible workplace, the apprenticeship of Salisbury, he decides to walk the 70 miles way to London. Hunger, cold, and fatigue weaken him over the next 7 days. In one village, signs warn that beggars will be thrown in jail. Finally, Oliver limps into a small town just outside London and he collapses because he's so tired, he's hungry, he's fatigued, he collapses in a doorway. Now, this is the place where he meets a boy. He's approached by a boy who's about his own age, named Jack Dawkins, who dresses and acts like a grown up man. Now, Jack purchases a large lunch for Oliver and informs him that he knows a gentleman in London who will let Oliver stay in his home for free. Now, here Oliver comes to know that Jack is actually called as the Artful Dodger. And Oliver can very easily guess from his appearance that this Artful Dodger's way of life is actually not correct, it is immoral. So he plans to ingratiate himself with the gentleman in London and then end all kinds of contacts or associations with Jack. That night, the Dodger takes Oliver to a squalid, dirty, unpleasant London neighborhood. At a dilapidated house, the Dodger calls out a password and a man allows them to enter. The Dodger conducts Oliver into a filthy, dirty, stenching black back room where an old shriveled Jew named Fagin and some boys are having supper. Now, we can well imagine what kind of a place he has landed in. Now, there are silk handkerchiefs hanging everywhere. The boys sitting over there are smoking pipes, they are drinking liquor, wine, and although they're all young, all these boys are young and they appear no older than the Dodger. But their acts and their expressions are such that they look so mature. And looking at the silk handkerchiefs, one can easily imagine that he has landed in a gang of thieves. Now, Oliver here is offered supper. He takes a share of the dinner and then he sinks into a deep sleep because he's tired after that long, long journey on foot. And in the next chapter, the next morning, Fagin takes out a box full of jewelry and watches, and he notices that Oliver is observing him. Fagin grabs a bread knife and asks Oliver if he was awake an hour before. Oliver says that he was not, and Fagin regains his kindly demeanor, his conduct. Now the Artful Dodger returns with another boy, whose name is Charlie Bates. Fagin asks if they worked hard that morning. The Dodger produces 2 pocketbooks and Charlie pulls out 4 handkerchiefs. Fagin says that they will have to teach Oliver to pick out the marks on the handkerchiefs with a needle. Oliver does not realize yet that he has joined the band of pickpockets. So he believes their jokes about teaching him how to make handkerchiefs and pocketbooks because he is very innocent. He is an innocent boy and he does not even think of the idea that he has landed up in the world of thieves and a gang of criminals. Now, what is going on here is that Dodger and Charlie, they practice picking Fagin's pockets. Two young women, Bet and Nancy, whom the narrator describes as remarkably free and agreeable, drop in for drinks. Fagin gives all of them some money and sends them out. Then Fagin lets Oliver practice taking a handkerchief out of his pocket and gives him a shilling for a job well done. So this is how Oliver's training as a thief, as a pickpocket, has begun at Fagin's place. Now, in the next chapter, we see that for days Oliver is there with the Fagin's gang, and Fagin keeps Oliver indoors, practicing the art of picking pockets. Oliver notices that Fagin punishes the Dodger and Charlie if they return home empty handed. Finally, that's the day when Fagin sends Oliver out with the Dodger and Charlie to work. Now, after some time, when they go out, the Dodger notices a wealthy gentleman absorbed, busy in reading at a bookstall. Oliver watches with horror as Charlie and the Dodger sneak up behind the man and steal his handkerchief. He finally understands the nature of Fagin's work. Now, this is his field work where he comes to understand what he is supposed to do, what he is expected to do, and how he is expected to steal things in pockets and handkerchiefs, silk handkerchiefs, out of the pockets of the wealthy gentleman of that town. Now, this gentleman turns. When he feels something has gone out of his pocket, he turns and he sees Oliver running away. Now, he thinks that Oliver is the thief, that is why he's running away. He raises a cry, he shouts. The Dodger and Charlie see Oliver running past them, so they join in, crying, "Stop the thief, stop the thief." And then a large crowd joins the pursuit. Now what happens is, Oliver hasn't done anything, but because he is running, people take him as a thief and he's caught. A police officer arrives, grabs Oliver by the collar, ignoring the boy's protest of his innocence. The gentleman who was robbed asks the police officer not to hurt Oliver and follows them to the police station. So this is how life has dramatically changed for Oliver. He doesn't know that he was here for this purpose, but he hasn't even stolen anything, but he is still caught by the officer. In the next chapter, the officer locks Oliver in the jail cell to await his appearance before the district magistrate, Mr. Fang. Now, Mr. Brownlee, the gentleman, who is actually looking at the whole scene, whose pocket was stolen, protests that he does not want to press any charges against this young boy. He thinks, somehow, that he recognizes something in Oliver's face, but he cannot put his finger on it. Now, Oliver is so nervous, he's so tired, and he faints in the courtroom. And Mr. Fang sentences him to 3 months of hard labor. So the owner of the bookstall also rushes there, reaches there, and tells Mr. Fang that 2 other boys had actually committed that crime of stealing. So Oliver is finally cleared of all charges. Pitying the sickly young Oliver, now this Mr. Brownlee, the kind gentleman, takes him into a coach and drives away. Now, in the final chapter, we see that Oliver is actually delirious with a fever for a few days. He is quite unwell, quite weak, quite nervous. And when he awakes finally, Brownlow's kindly housekeeper, Mrs. Bedwin, is watching over him. He says that he feels as if his mother has come to sit by him. The story of Oliver's pitiful life brings tears to Mrs. Bedwin's eyes. Once Oliver is strong enough to sit up, Mrs. Bedouin carries him downstairs, and a portrait of a young woman catches Oliver's eye and affects him greatly. Now, Mr. Brownlee drops in to see how actually Oliver was feeling after so many days. Oliver thanks him for his kindness. Brownlow exclaims with astonishment that Oliver closely resembles that lady who is in the portrait on the wall. Brownley's exclamation startles Oliver so much that he again faints. So this was a dramatic turn in the story that we will continue in the coming video. So stay tuned for the next part. Thank you for now.